of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
I want to begin by saying a few words to the honourable member for Thanet South. Firstly, thank you for meeting me privately this morning with your wife and daughter so I could personally convey my best wishes to all of you. Yeah. Secondly, on some occasions, and there aren't many, this House genuinely comes together as one, and we do so today to pay tribute to your courage and determination in not only coming through an awful ordeal, but by being here today with us in this chamber. Yeah. And thirdly, I want to acknowledge your deep sense of service. I think politics is about service. And resuming your duties as an MP, being here today, shows us it's an example for all of us of your deep sense of service. And we thank you for it. Yeah. I also welcome Figen Murray, who is up in the gallery. She lost her son, Martin, 7 years ago today in the Manchester Arena attacks, and we remember everybody who was lost in that awful attack. She's campaigning for Martin's Law, which we must make a reality as soon as possible. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, the infected blood scandal reflects a profound failure across almost every part of the British state. Yeah. On Monday in our apologies and yesterday on the question of compensation, this House was united. But too many times we've heard similar sentiments from that dispatch box and from this one. There are many hard yards to go. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that we will only now make real progress if we finally tackle the lack of openness, transparency and candour that Sir Brian Langstaff identified as having prolonged the victims' suffering for decades?
Yeah. Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The inquiry was established to get to the truth and provide answers, and this week's report represented a hugely significant moment for the community. This was an appalling scandal, and I think the whole House is grateful to the diligent work of all those who have supported Sir Brian Langstaff and the inquiry's work. And I also pay tribute to the bravery of every individual who has come forward and told their story in their fight for justice. Their voices have now finally been heard, and I agree with the honourable gentleman. We will listen to them and ensure that nothing like this can ever happen in our country again.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The infected blood scandal is shocking, truly shocking, but it's not unique. The story is familiar. Concerns raised but ignored, reports written but not acted on, victims and their families campaigning for years just to be heard. So I want to focus in, if I may, on the duty of candour, or lack of it, which has been a failing in scandal after scandal, injustice after injustice, from Grenfell to Horizon, Hillsborough, and now infected blood. And I've read the government has called for evidence about the duty of candour in health, but I can't think of a single example where that duty of candour should not apply to all public servants across the board. And I don't think it's possible for any of us to stand at these dispatch boxes and honestly say, never again, unless we address it. So does the Prime Minister agree that the time has now come for the duty of candour to be clearly enshrined in law across the board?
Mr. Speaker, I am, of course, aware of the recommendation made by Sir Brian Langstaff in the final report of the inquiry in relation to duties of candour and accountability, and indeed my honourable friend previously introduced the duty of candour into the health service. It is important that the government takes time to fully digest the gravity of the findings of the report. The wrongs which have been committed are devastating and life-altering for so many. Ensuring that nothing like this ever happens again is a priority, and of course we are sympathetic to that and going through the recommendations in detail at the moment before providing a comprehensive response. But of course, given the situation and the gravity of the findings, it's a recommendation that there is an enormous amount of sympathy for.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you. I understand the Prime Minister wants to look at the recommendations in detail and to come back to them in due course. But we can't look away on this duty of candour. So can I at least ask the Prime Minister to expand the call for evidence on the duty of candour beyond health, and we do owe that to the victims of Hillsborough and Horizon, and to work across the House to establish a far-reaching and binding duty of candour just as quickly as possible.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman will remember on Monday I said very specifically that the patterns and behaviour that we had seen in this appalling tragedy have been replicated in others, and I mentioned Hillsborough specifically. So I'm very aware that there are structural and behavioural cultural problems that we do need to fix. The duty of candour is something that, as I said, the principle, and there is an enormous amount of support for the principle of and sympathy for. He will understand we are digesting the full contents of the report, but of course we want to right the wrongs of the past and crucially ensure that nothing like this happens ever again.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his report, Sir Brian identified individual failures, a number of them, even cover-ups. But alongside that, he also found equally important and harder to reach institutional and cultural failings, including in the NHS. A defensive attitude which refused to acknowledge problems, the silencing of those who raised concerns, and a total failure of leadership when faced with the truth. Now, the NHS does a remarkable job every day, but that is indefensible. Does the Prime Minister agree that the very culture of the NHS needs to change?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and again, I think in response specifically to the question from my honourable friend, the member for Bromsgrove, we discussed this on Monday, and the NHS, of course, provides life-saving care to so many people every single day, for which we're enormously grateful. But it is absolutely clear, as the report makes crystal clear, that there were significant failings. The NHS failed. It failed people. It let them down. It's right that they are held accountable for that and learn the lessons. Now, there clearly have been improvements and changes in medical practice since that time, but going forward, we need to go through the full recommendations of Sir Brian Langstaff's report and hold the NHS to account for bringing through the changes that are necessary.
Keir Starmer.
We need reform, we need change, and I've seen firsthand how important reform is during my time running the Crown Prosecution Service. But I also saw how hard it is, particularly on cultural issues. It requires brave decisions and difficult decisions. Now, 11 years ago, the Health Secretary, as Health Secretary, the now Chancellor said, the era of gagging NHS staff from raising their worries about patient care must come to an end. But 11 years on and 10 months on from the Lucy Letby case, there are still clear examples of NHS managers still gagging staff and then being moved on instead of being moved out. So will the Prime Minister now commit to ensuring that those who do gag and silence whistleblowers will no longer be able to work in the NHS?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course the behaviour that the honourable gentleman describes is wrong and I believe already is illegal under our laws, but we will make sure that people do have the ability to raise concerns. And one thing that I know has given many of those who have been impacted by this scandal some reassurance is the appointment of Sir Robert Francis to be chair of the inquiry, who obviously is someone who not just has a wealth of experience dealing with this particular set of issues, but has a long track record of working with the NHS as well on the issues that the honourable gentleman raises.
Keir Starmer.
Sir Brian's report is a victory for all those campaigners and victims who fought so hard for this moment, including the Right Honourable Member for Hull North. But it's also one of profound pain, anger and sadness for so many. Now, there is a chance for us to make real progress on this issue, and we must do that with victims in mind. Now, given the degree of cross-party consensus that we've already seen on apologies and compensation, and given the government's promise to ensure compensation by the end of the year, will he also now promise to deliver on all the recommendations in the same time frame by the end of the year?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course, we want to deliver on the recommendations as quickly as practically possible, and indeed our expectation is that we can do that before the end of the year. But Sir Robert's appointment, as I said, will bring a wealth of experience, and it was crucial that the Chair had the knowledge and the expertise and familiarity with the issues here. His support for delivering the scheme and making sure that compensation can be paid by the end of the year, I think, will be invaluable. He talked about the community, and over the next few weeks, Sir Robert will seek views from the infected blood community, specifically on the proposed scheme, to make sure that the scheme will best serve those it is intended for. And our shared priority is delivering compensation to all those infected and affected with absolutely minimum delay, and begin bringing justice to all of those impacted.